What do street prostitutes and department store Santas have in common? More than you might think, according to the authors of SuperFreakonomics. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the mind-bending insights we'll explore in this episode. Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% Bookshelf. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a book that will challenge everything you think you know about how the world works. Imagine you're at a cocktail party, surrounded by the brightest minds in business and academia. The conversation is flowing, and someone poses a question. How much of what we believe about the world is actually true? It's a simple query, but it cuts to the heart of what makes SuperFreakonomics such a fascinating and important read. Written by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner, this book is a follow-up to their best-selling Freakonomics. But don't worry if you haven't read the original. SuperFreakonomics stands on its own as a tour de force of unconventional thinking and data-driven insights. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll explore how these rogue economists apply their unique lens to everything from the economics of prostitution to potential solutions for global warming. We'll discover why conventional wisdom often fails us, how incentives drive human behavior in unexpected ways, and the power of data to reveal surprising truths about our world. But before we dive in, let me give you a taste of what's to come. Have you ever wondered why a skilled doctor might be statistically more dangerous than a convicted criminal? Or how a simple alteration to your car could potentially save thousands of lives? These are just a few of the counterintuitive ideas we'll unpack as we journey through the pages of SuperFreakonomics. So, buckle up, because we're about to embark on an intellectual adventure that will transform how you view economics, human nature, and problem solving. Your next boardroom discussion may never be the same. Let's start by exploring what Levitt and Dubner call the hidden side of everyday life. At its core, SuperFreakonomics is about questioning our assumptions and using data to uncover truths that are often obscured by conventional wisdom or moral posturing. Consider this. How much of what you believe about the world is based on actual evidence, and how much is simply accepted wisdom that's never been truly scrutinized? The authors argue that by applying economic thinking to various aspects of life, we can gain profound insights into human behavior and societal dynamics. One of the book's central themes is the power of incentives in shaping behavior. We all respond to incentives, whether we realize it or not. But the way these incentives play out in real life can be surprising and sometimes even counterintuitive. Take, for example, the case of child car seats. For years, it's been accepted as gospel that these devices save lives. But when Levitt and Dubner dug into the data, they found something shocking. For children aged 2 and older, car seats perform no better than regular seatbelts in preventing death or serious injury. This finding flies in the face of decades of public policy and parental anxiety. But here's where it gets really interesting. The authors don't stop at debunking the myth. They go on to propose a simple solution that could potentially save thousands of young lives, redesigning the standard seatbelt to better fit children. It's a perfect example of how questioning our assumptions and following the data can lead to innovative solutions. This brings us to another key insight from the book, the law of unintended consequences. Often, well-intentioned policies or actions can have unforeseen and sometimes negative effects. The authors illustrate this principle with numerous examples, from environmental regulations to healthcare policies. One particularly striking case involves hospitals and the spread of infections. In an effort to improve hygiene, many hospitals implemented hand sanitizing stations. Seems like a no-brainer, right? But the data showed that these stations actually led to an increase in infections. Why? Because doctors and nurses, feeling that they could quickly sanitize their hands between patients, became less likely to wash their hands thoroughly with soap and water. This example underscores a crucial lesson for business leaders and policymakers. Always be wary of simple solutions to complex problems. The world is an intricate system of interconnected parts, and changing one element can have ripple effects throughout the entire system. But perhaps the most powerful tool in the SuperFreakonomics arsenal is the use of data to reveal counterintuitive truths. The authors are masters at finding and analyzing data sets that shed new light on old problems. They're not afraid to tackle controversial topics, and they let the numbers speak for themselves. This approach leads to some fascinating revelations. For instance, did you know that drunk walking is, per mile, about 8 times more dangerous than drunk driving, or that a prostitute in Chicago is more likely to have sex with a police officer than to be arrested by one. These aren't just titillating factoids. They're windows into the complex ways that incentives and human behavior interact in the real world. So how can business leaders and decision-makers apply these insights in their own work? The key is to cultivate a mindset of curiosity and skepticism. Don't accept conventional wisdom at face value. Look for ways to gather and analyze data that can provide new perspectives on old problems. For example, if you're trying to improve productivity in your organization, don't just implement the latest management fad. Instead, look for ways to measure the actual impact of different interventions. Set up controlled experiments if possible, and always be open to the possibility that the results might surprise you. Remember, too, that incentives matter, but they don't always work in the ways we expect. When designing policies or strategies, think carefully about how people might respond to the incentives you're creating, and be prepared to adjust your approach based on real-world results. As we move into the second part of our discussion, I want you to keep these ideas in mind: the power of incentives, the law of unintended consequences, and the importance of data-driven insights. We're about to apply these concepts to some of the biggest challenges facing our world today. Imagine for a moment that you're transported back in time to New York City in the year 1898. The city is facing a crisis of epic proportions. No, it's not a financial crash or a deadly epidemic. The problem? Horse manure. Yes, you heard that right. At the time, horses were the primary mode of transportation in cities around the world. In New York alone, there were about 175,000 horses, each producing around 22 pounds of manure per day. That's nearly 2 million pounds of horse manure, every single day. City planners were in a panic. They predicted that within 50 years, horse manure would rise to the third story of Manhattan's buildings. The first urban planning conference, held in New York in 1898, ended in failure after 3 days because no one could figure out a solution to the horse manure crisis. Now, fast forward to today. What happened? Did New York drown in a sea of manure? Of course not. The solution came from an unexpected place: technology. The invention and mass production of the automobile rendered the horse manure crisis obsolete almost overnight. Levitt and Dubner use this historical anecdote to make a powerful point about how we approach global challenges today, particularly climate change. They argue that we often get so caught up in the doom and gloom predictions that we fail to consider how human ingenuity and technological progress might provide solutions we can't even imagine yet. This doesn't mean we should sit back and wait for a miracle cure to our problems, but it does suggest that we should be open to unconventional solutions and skeptical of doomsday scenarios. The authors apply this thinking to the issue of global warming, and their conclusions are, to say the least, controversial. They argue that many of the proposed solutions to climate change, things like carbon taxes or emissions trading schemes, are likely to be ineffective or even counterproductive. Instead, they propose exploring more radical ideas, like geoengineering. One concept they discuss involves pumping sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere to create a cooling effect, essentially mimicking the aftermath of a volcanic eruption. It's a provocative idea, and the authors are careful to note the potential risks and unknowns. But their point is that we should be considering all options, not just the ones that fit our preconceived notions of what an environmental solution should look like. This brings us to another key insight from the book: why conventional solutions often fail. Levitt and Dubner argue that we have a tendency to approach problems with a moralistic mindset rather than an economic one. We focus on what we think people should do, rather than understanding what they actually do and why. Take recycling, for example. Most of us feel virtuous when we separate our trash and put it out for recycling, but the authors point out that in many cases, the environmental benefits of recycling are outweighed by the economic and environmental costs of the recycling process itself. This doesn't mean we should stop recycling altogether, but it does suggest that we need to be more thoughtful about which materials we recycle and how we do it. The book also explores the potential of cheap and simple fixes for complex issues. One fascinating example involves reducing child mortality in the developing world. While many aid organizations focus on expensive interventions like building hospitals or distributing medicine, The authors highlight a study that found a much simpler and cheaper solution: giving mothers small sachets of salt and sugar to mix into water. This oral rehydration therapy can prevent deaths from diarrhea, one of the leading killers of children in poor countries. So how can business leaders and policymakers apply this mindset to current challenges? The key is to resist the urge to always go for the grand, sweeping solution. Sometimes, small, targeted interventions can have outsized impacts. For instance, if you're trying to improve safety in your workplace, don't just implement a comprehensive new safety program. Look for simple changes that could have big effects. Maybe it's redesigning a piece of equipment to make it more intuitive to use safely. Or perhaps it's changing the layout of a workspace to reduce the likelihood of accidents. Another important lesson is to always be on the lookout for unintended consequences. When you implement a new policy or strategy, think carefully about how people might respond in ways you didn't anticipate, and be prepared to adjust your approach based on real-world results. Remember, too, that solutions often come from unexpected places. Encourage cross-disciplinary thinking in your organization. Sometimes, the fresh perspective of someone from a completely different field can lead to breakthrough insights. As we move into the final section of our discussion, I want you to keep these ideas in mind: the importance of technological innovation in solving seemingly intractable problems, the potential pitfalls of conventional solutions, and the power of cheap and simple fixes. We're about to explore how these concepts play out in some of the most unconventional markets imaginable. Now, let's venture into territory that might make some of us uncomfortable. What can we learn about economics from studying prostitutes and drug dealers? As it turns out, quite a lot. Levitt and Dubner dedicate a significant portion of SuperFreakonomics to exploring what they call extreme markets, areas of economic activity that operate on the fringes of legality or social acceptability. Their goal isn't to pass moral judgment, but to use these markets as a lens through which to examine fundamental economic principles. Let's start with the economics of prostitution. The authors present a detailed case study of street prostitutes in Chicago, based on data collected by a former police officer turned sociologist. What they found challenges many of our assumptions about this oldest of professions. For instance, did you know that the average street prostitute in Chicago earns about $27 per hour? That's roughly 4 times what she could make working at a legitimate low-skilled job. However, this seemingly high wage comes with significant risks: violence, disease, and arrest chief among them. But here's where it gets really interesting. The data shows that prostitutes who work with pimps actually earn less money per trick than those who work independently. So, why do some women choose to work with pimps? The answer lies in what economists call the principal agent problem. Pimps, it turns out, serve a similar function to a corporate board of directors. They provide a measure of protection and stability, and they help to solve the trust problem between prostitutes and their clients. In essence, they're middlemen who help the market function more smoothly, even if they take a cut of the profits. This example illustrates a crucial economic concept: how markets organize themselves to solve problems of trust and information asymmetry. It's the same principle that underlies everything from the role of banks in the financial system to the function of online reviews and e-commerce. The authors also delve into the economics of drug dealing, drawing on research that involved gaining unprecedented access to the financial records of a Chicago gang. What they found was surprising. Contrary to popular perception, most street-level drug dealers earn very little money. Less than minimum wage, in fact. So, why do they do it? The answer lies in the structure of the drug dealing organization, which closely resembles that of a legitimate corporation. There's a small group at the top making big money, while the vast majority at the bottom earn very little but dream of moving up the ladder. This insight has implications far beyond the world of illegal drugs. It speaks to the power of organizational structures and incentives in shaping behavior. It also highlights the often overlooked economic motivations behind activities we might view as purely criminal or antisocial. But what does all this have to do with legitimate business and economics? More than you might think. First, these extreme markets provide a sort of economic laboratory where the basic principles of supply and demand play out in stark relief. By studying them, we can gain insights into how markets function under various constraints and pressures. Second, understanding these underground economies can inform business strategy and risk assessment. For instance, the ways in which illegal markets solve problems of trust and information asymmetry could inspire innovative approaches in legitimate businesses. Third, these examples underscore the importance of looking beyond surface-level explanations to understand human behavior. Just as the true motivations of drug dealers or prostitutes might surprise us, so too might the real drivers of behavior in our own organizations or markets. For business leaders, the lesson here is clear. Don't assume you understand the motivations and incentives at play in your market or organization. Dig deeper, look for data that might challenge your assumptions, and be prepared to find that the reality is more complex and perhaps more interesting than you initially thought. As we wrap up our exploration of SuperFreakonomics, let's recap some of the key takeaways that can inform your approach to business and decision-making. First and foremost, question your assumptions. The world is rarely as simple as it seems, and conventional wisdom is often wrong. Whether you're developing a new product, crafting company policy, or trying to solve a global challenge, start by challenging what you think you know. Second, embrace the power of economic thinking. This doesn't mean reducing everything to dollars and cents. Rather, it's about understanding the incentives and trade-offs that drive human behavior. When you're trying to influence outcomes, whether it's customer behavior, employee performance, or societal change, think carefully about the incentives you're creating. Third, let data be your guide. In a world awash with information, the ability to gather, analyze, and interpret data is more crucial than ever. But remember, it's not just about having data. It's about asking the right questions and being open to what the data tells you, even if it contradicts your expectations. Fourth, be wary of unintended consequences. Every action has ripple effects, and these are often hard to predict. When implementing new strategies or policies, try to think several steps ahead, and always be prepared to adjust course based on real-world results. Finally, don't underestimate the power of cheap and simple fixes. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the least obvious ones. Foster a culture of creativity and cross-disciplinary thinking in your organization. The next big breakthrough might come from an unexpected place. As we conclude, I want to encourage you to apply these concepts in your own decision-making and problem-solving. The world is complex, but with the right tools and mindset, we can uncover insights that lead to better outcomes for our businesses, our communities, and our world. SuperFreakonomics is more than just a book of interesting facts and counterintuitive insights. It's a call to think differently, to question everything, and to let data and economic reasoning guide us to better solutions. Whether you're a CEO, an aspiring entrepreneur, or simply someone interested in understanding the world better, this book offers valuable lessons that can reshape your approach to problem-solving and decision-making. Remember, the full book goes into much greater depth on all these topics and many more. If you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I encourage you to check out the full text. You can find a link to purchase the book or audiobook in this episode's description. Thank you for joining me on this journey through SuperFreakonomics. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep freaking out your economics.